Welcome to today's Ethnic Media Service Zoom News Briefing. I'm Pilar Marrero, Associate Editor of Ethnic Media Services. Our topic today focuses on behind the surge of strikes, why can't we pay a living wage? The writers and actors strike that has paralyzed Hollywood is part of the ongoing hot labor summer. And according to an expert we have on today's panel, and we will hear from him later, it has become the biggest moment for strikes since the 1970s. In Los Angeles, hotel and restaurant workers are holding rolling walkouts. At the same time, United Parcel Services, Inc. unions just reached a historic agreement to avoid a massive strike. If negotiations fail, Detroit's big three automakers will likely join in the coming weeks. Amazon and Starbucks workers have tried to unionize and make some gains. That has proven to be harder than they expected, or maybe not. The bottom line for the most of these actions is pay and benefits in a moment of soaring corporate profits, high inflation, and a larger question. Why can't much of corporate America appropriately compensate their workers and professionals? And how should workers fight the threat that artificial intelligence will take their job, among other things? Our panelists will provide the frontline view of striking workers and the point of view of labor experts on the larger issue at stake. We ask speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean, and we ask reporters to enter questions in the chat. We will take questions for each panelist as time allows, with more questions at the end. We will send the video of today's briefing and expanded bios with contact information to all participants later today. In the panel, we have California State Senator Maria Elena Durazo from the 26th District. She's a former labor leader. She was the first woman secretary-treasurer of the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor before becoming a legislator. Then we have Nelson Lichtenstein, research professor in the Department of History at the UC Santa Barbara, where he directs the Center for the Study of Work, Labor, and Democracy. Ada Briceño, co-president of Unite Here, Local 11. Lucero Ramirez, a striker at the Waldorf Astoria here in LA. Jorge Rivera, vice chair of the Latinx Writers Committee and with the Writers Guild of America. Professor Emeritus Harley Shaken, Geography and Education at UC Berkeley. Okay, we do have a big panel today, so I will manage time somewhat tightly. Each of you will have between 5 to 6 minutes to answer my initial question to each of you when I call you. And then there will be more chance to answer reporters' questions, either by voice, or if each of you or one of you or many of you would like to answer in the chat, we have always reporters putting some questions in the chat. Okay, so we now go right into it, and we welcome California State Senator Maria Elena Durazo, who, as I said before, becoming an elected official, was a labor leader here in Los Angeles for a long time. I would argue the top labor leader. Welcome, Senator. What is your take about the hot summer of labor, the multiple strikes and labor actions we are seeing, and what they say about this country's ability to have a healthy and well-compensated working and middle class?
Well, buenos dias, Pilar, and I really appreciate you bringing together the various ethnic media outlets. And I'm glad you're paying attention. Others don't, but you do. And so thank you very much for that leadership role. And good morning to everyone. I just want to say, you know, my whole life's work, my whole lifetime has been in the labor movement. And not just, you know, with titles, but as a working class person. And I think that's really important, because when we worked as migrant farm workers from town to town to town, we did not have shelter. So we were homeless much of the time. We didn't have healthcare, access to healthcare. And of course, we lived in poverty, for poverty wages, for a very, very powerful, very wealthy industry. So it wasn't that the industry couldn't afford it, or it wasn't that there was some economic downturn. It was simply that the workers didn't have the power, collective bargaining. So in my, you know, the rest of my life, that's what I thought was the most important way that we could address poverty. And now we have different issues. But I just want to remind us too, Pilar, that a couple of decades ago in the 80s and 90s, we had a massive resurgence of the labor movement. And it was very, very important as you look at California today, and our progressive policies was based on the labor movement of the 80s and 90s as it continued. And that labor movement was led by Latinos primarily, but it was led by immigrant workers. And they had a vision. These immigrant workers had a vision not only to address poverty, wages, and exploitation, and no access to health care, but they also had a vision of changing the system. And so the organizing that took place, whether it was the drywallers taking over the freeways, or whether it was the hotel workers, or whether it was the janitors, security officers, it had a vision. The labor movement had a vision of how all of these were going to change for everyone. We're going to change for the betterment of everyone. And that was a really important part of the labor movement. So as we look now to the rise in the activism and all these extraordinary, courageous positions that the labor movement is taking, we also should measure the power that will be gained by as a result of those strikes as to what it means to the rest of working class people. So that's, I think, really important to stand back and get that perspective. California would not be what it is today, by far the most progressive state, in the country, if we had not had a labor movement in the 80s and 90s, again, led by Latinos and immigrants, if that hadn't happened. So as we look at this, I'm, obviously, give great applause and respect to the Writers Guild. I mean, we had just a few months ago, we had 60,000, was it 60,000 of the UC workers, 40,000 of the UC workers, right, who went out on strike. Now, that didn't happen overnight. That didn't happen just because they were angry about something. It took many years to get there. So the most powerful parts of our labor movement, like this, it's not going to be the summer of 2023. It's going to be what happens as a result of the summer of 2023 and what it does not only for those individual unions, but what it does for all of the working class people. So I would, challenge us to look at it in a deeper way.
Senator, thank you. Just one question, couple of minutes to answer, and we move on to the next speaker. What are the next steps for labor? And are you and your colleagues in California legislature offering any policy solutions to this issue?
We're always looking at the policy issues. One of the biggest economic drivers, I think, to these strikes, maybe not every individual person, is the cost of housing. That is a major issue that is, pushing for such, militancy through the strikes. And that points to people not having enough, they don't make enough to pay the rent or to pay the mortgage. And so we look at, all the impact that is pushing towards the militancy that is taking place right now. So we have to look at, as legislators, what are our policies on housing? That's not the solution. That's merely being a partner or being an ally to the kinds of issues that are being taken on. The gig economy. The gig economy was welcomed. It was a progressive thing to do. Look at us. Anybody who didn't know how to use the internet was seen as a, you're a dinosaur. You're past your time. And look at what the gig economy is doing to our economy overall. Why? Because they didn't take workers into account, because they didn't think about what it was going to do to destroy working families and our ability to support ourselves. We have to look at, and we have taken a look at pieces of the gig economy, Uber and Lyft and those companies. We took on, back then, Assembly Member Lorena Gonzalez took on that issue in a big way, in a significant way. It was a real fight. It was a real battle. So we try to take on from big issues like that to things like, okay, how about sick leave, sick pay, right? So there's a proposal right now to increase paid sick leave to 7 days. We were also in certain policies help the minor league baseball players, win their fight for recognition. So there are pieces and there are ways in which we are allies and passing. And then I don't have time right now, Pilar, but looking to the future and not just right now is our green economy, and the state is investing tens of billions, will result in maybe hundreds of billions together with federal funding. What is our future economy? How are we preparing for that green manufacturing? So then we're not told, well, sorry, you got to do it somewhere else in the rest of the world. We can't do it in California. We have to have an aggressive position on those new green jobs being more than minimum wage. Because if we don't put that on the table right now, they will be minimum wage, just like in the 30s and 40s of the past. So, those are kind of the pieces and the vision that many of us in the legislature have.
Senator, can you stay on or you need to go?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. Thank you, Pilar.
Okay, cool. All right. So let me call the next speaker. We invite labor historian and professor Nelson Lichtenstein. We used a quote of yours in our invite to this panel. You said this is probably one of the biggest moments of striking since the 1970s. So what's your take on the main reasons that this is happening? Is there something different now that wasn't happening before?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me here. And I want to just endorse one thing that Maria Durazo said, and that is that yes, in California, the Latino organized Latinos have been in the vanguard. They've been the leaders of the labor movement, and that has made a dramatic and incredible difference. And you can just compare, say, California to Texas. There are lots and lots of Latinos in Texas, but because they aren't organized and leading the labor movement there, and certainly in the numbers that in California, when Texas is a much more conservative state. Hopefully that'll change, but I think that is the decisive reason that California is a sort of so-called blue state, because of the organization of Latinos and their leadership of the labor movement. And we're privileged to have one of those leaders with us today. So yeah, why is this? I think the one thing to say is that in the 1970s and before, I mean, the kind of the number of strikes and sort of what's happening right now was sort of like normal, was like, every year. Today it seems extraordinary, but between the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, in that whole period, what's happening today was happening every year. And that sent a message to employers, which is why, whether they were unionized or not, employers were on their guard, and therefore knew since they didn't want to strike or didn't want labor trouble, they would they kept their wages and benefits higher. But of course, the reason for now, I think, is a couple of things. This is kind of not something that will surprise a lot of people. One is we do have a very, very tight labor market. Unemployment is very, very low, and that's partly due to the Biden administration and really Trump too. Also, the big spending bills that were passed during COVID with Trump, first with Trump and then with Biden, and that has meant we have unemployment at 3.5%, which is means that if you don't like your job, you can either you don't fear as much either going on strike or trying to form a union or finding another job for that matter. Secondly, and here this is, and everyone has their experience of this, there's no doubt that the whole COVID experience, the pandemic, what did it do? I think it delegitimized the leadership of many, many organizations, employers, public institutions, whatever they were. There's sort of the sense that there was a failure. It may not have been the immediate fault of those, but it was sort of a failure to take care of, to protect the people who worked. And there was a sense of people, whether they were housekeepers or fast food workers or grocery workers, or people, even people who were more white collar and professional. There was a sort of sense that this was a delegitimized, a kind of a failure on the part of traditional authority. The same sort of failure that we saw in the early 1930s during the Great Depression, when, hey, big business is supposed to be sustaining, good jobs for people, and then all of a sudden we have a huge crash. Or for that matter, in the civil rights era, when it was expected that employers were sort of treating people fair, and then when they weren't, there was that created a tremendous amount of mobilization and grievance. So I think that's entered into it as well. It's not just low unemployment, but I think that sense of justified and moral grievance against employers. And then I would also say that there's also a kind of an ideological, political, cultural shift that Maria DeRosa referenced this, that the promises of the tech economy, the promises of new the internet and everything else have okay, it's good to have the web, what we're doing now, the web, and it's good to have all of these new technologies, but they haven't by themselves fundamentally done anything that in and of themselves will be beneficial to workers. And in fact, they can be manipulated and used by management. And I'm struck by the degree to which very high profile people, many earning enormously good incomes, Hollywood stars like Harrison Ford or Jennifer Lawrence, athletes of various sorts, and then of course the minor leaguers formed the union recently, academics, teaching assistants, at UC. I mean, these are, in a way, these are kind of culturally sort of privileged people. But they've come out and are very strongly in favor of unions, and I think that has an impact everywhere. Obviously, it's very important and essential that those who are either the housekeepers or fast food workers or Teamsters or whatnot also have the sense of a union impulse. But it also, I think, in terms of the society as a whole, it means something when these kind of elite cultural figures side with the unions, and that was true, by the way, in the 1930s, obviously, when the all sorts of people were pro-union, like Eleanor Roosevelt or what have you, and then of course in the 60s that was true for the civil rights movement, etc. But I want to make one final point here, and then I'll stop. And it's a sad point. It's not a good point. We are having we almost had a strike of the Teamsters. We obviously, Hollywood is on strike. There probably will be a strike of the auto workers, I suspect, in September, etc. And that's, I think that does indicate a change in consciousness and militancy, and that's happening. All of those unions I've mentioned to you are either 80 or 120 years old. I mean, at various moments in the past, they've kind of been, rotten or corrupt or ineffectual. But I mean, right now they're full of young firebrands and are doing it. But they're organizations that are 80, 90, 100 years old. Non-union workers don't strike. They may be pissed off. They may quit. They may make their voices heard, but they don't strike in a kind of organized and powerful fashion or project the threat of strike. And that's why, despite the sentiment that's out there, the tight labor market, that companies like Starbucks and Amazon, and you can name Walmart, and you can name as many others as you want, are vociferously resisting unionization even at this moment. And frankly, there's probably a big reputational cost, for Starbucks or any of these companies, Amazon, but they've decided, we don't, we're going to, just resist, even in this moment when the National Labor Relations Board is run by liberals, pro-union liberals, when the unemployment's low and there's clearly sentiment. And so that's a challenge for us, even at this moment, and it has to be faced. Thank you. I'll return to the conversation later on.
Thank you. Amazing. Okay, so you were saying that because of the tight labor market, workers seem to have the upper hand, but not without unions. So has union membership gone up at all, or keeps going down?
Well, it's sort of it's how should I put it? In California, actually, it's ticked up a bit. It has gone up a bit. We've had some notable organizing victories, mainly in the public sector. Where employment goes up, as in like the hospitality sector, where we do have some strong unions, nevertheless, union density has gone down just because there are more workers being employed in non-union positions. I mean, we can't ignore the fact that today only 6% of all workers in the private sector are in unions.
Wow.
And it's much higher than that in the public, but it's only 6%, which means that back in the 30s, what were the important industries? Well, auto and steel and electrical. What are the important industries today? Silicon Valley, and Microsoft and Twitter, et cetera. And these are not organized. So it's the commanding heights. That's what I call them. The commanding heights of capitalism have to be unionized for the union movement to have a real impact on the society. So the fact is that today, despite all of this activity, the proportion of Americans who are in unions remains very low.
Thank you so much, Professor. Please stay around. And now we are going to have the testimony from the trenches. In LA, we are having the picket lines by actors and writers. They're on strike, SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild. And also we've been having rolling walkouts of hotel and restaurant workers. So we are going to invite Ada Briceño. She's co-president of Unite Here, Local 11, which is the union that represents these workers. And we will hear from a hotel worker that is directly affected afterwards. Ms. Briceño, why are hotel workers walking out? What are they asking for?
Pilar, I just want to start by saying thank you so much for lifting our voices. And to Senator Durazo, thank you for uplifting workers, but especially hotel workers. And you know what a contribution, we know what a contribution you've made to our local and to workers across the nation. This is the largest strike in the hotel industry and what they've seen. The hotel industry is making profit records beyond pandemic levels, while our workers are struggling. They're struggling with the high number of inflation and the unbearable cost of housing. We see them couch surfing, taking shifts and renting rooms. If you work in the AM, you rent the room in the PM and vice versa. We see them sleeping in their cars, and they're one paycheck away from being houseless. We know that they have to, travel 2 or 3 hours to make it to work, and that this is a burden in their lives. But this is what leaving the backbone of the hospitality out means and what it creates. This is corporate greed at its best. Our members have voted to strike. This contract includes about 15,000 of our workers, and in 43 hotels, we have struck already. We have had strikes in Pasadena, in downtown LA, in Santa Monica, in Anaheim, in Irvine, in Dana Point, LAX, Beverly Hills, and many, many other cities. In case you haven't had a chance to visit yet, our picket lines have been magnificent. We've often been joined by the writers and SAG-AFTRA. To get our message across loud and clear, we have drums, pots, pans, bullhorns, speakers, highly visible signs, and massive banners. You can really feel the courage of our members in the air. That's why, many more will come out in future days. The company has come to the table and has made no movement. So we are going to keep pushing. Our demands are very simple. We want to keep hotel workers with a roof over their heads. Wages, pension, healthcare, and workload issues are our top key issues. We have tons of supporters who have pulled conventions and groups since our strike. We have folks like the Democratic Governors Association, Vice President Harris pulled out from staying in one of those hotels, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Vandertrump Rules canceled their filming, Japanese American Citizens League, and many, many more. Snoop Dogg has canceled his show in light of all the strikes. And now we ask Taylor Swift, who's coming to Los Angeles, with all, the folks that love her, to come to the local area. We're asking them to postpone her concert until we can get a contract. We know that they're doubling the prices of the rooms as we speak. We say, Taylor, let's make this an era of solidarity. We ask everyone to join us in honoring the picket lines, not to cross them, and to donate towards our strike fund and to hear the voices of our hotel workers. And I know you'll hear from one of them pretty soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Briceño. We have a question from Araceli Martinez from La Opinión.
Hello, Ada. I would like to know if you can please give us a profile of who are these workers. Are most of them Latinos or from which minorities? And how many hotel workers do we have on a strike right now? And who is working on behalf of them in the workers now?
Yes, thank you. That's a wonderful question. So the profile of our workers are, room attendants, dishwashers who are women of color. Many of them are women of color, Latinas who really make the hotel industry profitable. We have had thousands of workers out on strike. And as we speak, the corporations have tried to hire people to break the strike, but we know they're struggling inside the hotels. We know they're closing down restaurants. We know that they can't give the service that the guests are paying for. We hear that there are a lot of managers who are trying to make rooms and they are unsuccessful in trying to get the work that are the backbone of the hospitality industry. Our workers are able to create the experience, yet they're charging the hundreds and hundreds of dollars without giving the service that the guests deserve. That's our expertise. Nobody does it better than us. That's why we have to be compensated for that work. We've got to be able to put a roof over our heads.
Thank you. Let's talk now to a hotel worker who has walked out and is participating in the strike. Her name is Lucero Ramirez, and she works at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel here in LA. She will speak in Spanish, and I will interpret back and forth for her. Lucero, bienvenida. ¿Me oyes?
Sí.
Te invito a contar brevemente por qué estás participando en la huelga. And I asked her to tell us why she's participating in the strike. And tengo que traducir, entonces hazlo cortito, por favor.
Sí, buenos días. Pues la razón que yo estoy saliendo en strike es porque quiero un mejor pago para tener una mejor vida. También me preocupa mucho mi pensión y mi seguro médico. Es algo muy, muy importante ahorita en estos tiempos para todas las personas y más después de la pandemia. Sabemos que ha sido una etapa muy difícil para demasiadas personas y es algo que es demasiado muy importante.
Ok, Lucero, déjame traducir eso. She wants a better pay to have a better life. She's worried about her retirement and eventual pension and her health insurance. She feels that this is an important moment and this is an important issue, particularly after the pandemic, that workers secure healthcare for the future. Lucero, ¿tú qué haces en el hotel? ¿Cuál es tu trabajo allí? What is her work at the hotel?
Soy recamarera, limpio cuartos.
Y she cleans the rooms. ¿Y cómo es tu trabajo? ¿Qué tan intenso es tu trabajo? How intense is this work?
Es demasiado desgastante físicamente porque pues obviamente es muy pesado y más porque como en este hotel donde yo soy, son 5 estrellas, tenemos que tener atención a detalle muy específico. Los pisos son de mármol, las alfombras son demasiado muy caras, traídas de alguna parte de Italia, creo. Además, los tenemos demasiado vidrio, entonces nosotros tenemos que tener todos los cuartos nítidos, limpios, no fingerprints, no, tiene que estar 100% limpio. Y agacharse, levantar es demasiado desgastante físicamente.
The hotel that she works on, it's a 5-star hotel. So they have some additional requirements for cleanliness. They have to put attention, very strong attention to detail. You know, the floors are marble, the carpets are like brought from Italy. And, you know, they can't have like fingerprints on things. So they have to clean very intensely and, you know, lean over and constantly physically moving. It's very, it takes a toll physically, she says. Lucero, y cuéntanos, ¿la compensación es suficiente para poder vivir en Los Ángeles? Is the payment enough to live in LA?
No, no es suficiente. Nuestro cheque regularmente sale alrededor de 1,500 después de taxes. Y yo ahorita en el lugar donde estoy viviendo, vivo en Hollywood, yo pago 1,100 de renta al mes, pero yo ya tengo 11 años viviendo en este lugar. Pero demasiados de mis compañeros pagan mucho más. Yo ahorita en estos tiempos yo no puedo pensar en moverme a un lugar más grande o moverme a otro lugar donde tal vez tenga un poco más de comodidades porque las rentas son demasiado caras. Eso para mí es un lujo, no puedo darme el lujo. Y esa es otra lucha que tengo muy constantemente todos los días. Me pregunto, ¿será hoy el día que me vayan a decir que tengo que salir de aquí? Porque aquí donde vivo en Hollywood está creciendo muy rápidamente. Un día está una casa, al día siguiente está un edificio, condominios que sabemos que los rentan demasiado caros y pues siempre estoy con ese miedo constante. En caso de que a mí me tocara moverme de aquí, yo no voy a tener un lugar, me va a tocar manejar con otros compañeros 2-3 horas fuera de Los Ángeles porque aquí es muy cara la renta.
Ok, Lucero. Los 1,500 que me decías del cheque, ¿eso es mensual?
Sí, no, cada 2 semanas.
Okay.
1,500 cada 2 semanas.
Okay, she says the money that she makes is not enough, even though she makes $1,500 every 2 weeks. She pays $1,100 in Hollywood because she's lived there for a long time and she has rent control. But she has many coworkers that have to drive 2 or 3 hours because they can't afford to live here. She fears she's going to be kicked out of the apartment because Hollywood is changing and they're building new buildings and they're, you know, new communities are coming in. And that if that happens, she won't be able to live in Los Angeles. Lucero, cuéntanos un poco más de cómo estás, qué es lo que tus compañeros quieren con esta huelga. Tell us what you and your coworkers want with this strike.
Queremos, obviamente, que nos aumenten un salario digno, la pensión, el seguro médico y que traigan los niveles de empleados como antes de pandemia, porque ahorita después de la pandemia todos tenemos que hacer el trabajo de 2 o a veces hasta 3 personas.
Okay, she says that, of course, the salary, the pension, the healthcare, improvement in the salary, but also that the hotels bring up the number of workers because after the pandemic, they have less workers and the workers that remain have to do double the work that they used to do before. Okay, gracias, Lucero. Deja ver si tenemos una pregunta. Oh, Araceli pregunta. Okay, sí, ya te respondí esa pregunta. We already answered that question about the salary. How many rooms? Okay, ¿cuántas habitaciones tienes que limpiar por día? How many rooms do you have to clean per day?
En este hotel limpiamos 6 cuartos por día, pero no son los cuartos tradicionales normales, son suites grandes. Son 10 cuadrados, no tengo un número, pero son cuartos demasiado grandes, obviamente 5 estrellas, tienen demasiado espacio, los baños están grandísimos, con tinas que me llega hasta la cintura, si yo me meto, me llega hasta la cintura la tina de profundo,
Wow. Como limpiar un apartamento. It's like cleaning a whole apartment. Okay, she says they clean 6 rooms per day, but these are not regular rooms. This is a 5-star hotel, so the rooms are extremely big, like an apartment even. And she says even in the bathroom, the bathtub is up to my, up to my chest, up to my my waist, and so they're really big rooms. There's another question in Spanish here. ¿Tienes familia y qué es lo que necesitarías ganar para que te alcance? Do you have a family and what do you need to make so you can make it?
Así no, yo ahorita estoy sola, solamente tengo mi mascota, pero le ayudo financieramente a mis papás, que ya son personas de edad, y para que yo pudiera vivir un poquito más tranquila con los $5 de aumento que nos están pidiendo ahorita, sería bastante mucha ayuda.
$5 la hora.
Sí.
Okay, she says that she lives by herself with her pet, but she actually supports her parents who are older, and they are asking for additional $5 per hour. Lucero, muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros. Quédate un ratito si puedes. Gracias.
Sí.
Okay. All right, so thank you for that. Let's move on to another striking worker. We do know that the writers and actors strike is creating waves around the world, and it has paralyzed productions in LA and beyond. And we are thankful to have Jorge Rivera, Vice Chair of the Latinx Writers Committee, WGA, who has been out there walking and striking. Jorge, thanks for being with us. Tell us about the ways in which your business has changed that is threatening the livelihood of so many people.
Sure. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me amongst this esteemed panel. I'm honored to be here. And secondly, I just want to convey a message of solidarity to my siblings in the hotel union. You all deserve exactly what you're asking for. You deserve a living wage. You deserve enough income to put yourselves to have a decent life and take care of your families and pay your rent and so on and so forth. Everything that the American dream has promised all of us, you deserve it. So stay strong. We're out there with you, both on the picket lines and in spirit. So thank you for fighting that fight. Yeah, I think that, the entertainment industry is experiencing many of the things that we've heard expressed this morning, largely due to the disruption that the tech economy has brought upon our industry. I think to understand what we're experiencing, we have to go back to 1960, which was the last time the actors and writers have gone on strike together. So it's been 60 years since then. And during that strike, we were able to win our points around residuals and healthcare, which really established a business model that's been working for the last 60 years, which basically means that, in the last 10 years or so, up until the last 10 years ago, between 1960 and maybe about 10 years ago, the majority of television was generated, the revenues were generated from ad sales, meaning that most television was on broadcast and had areas within the program to sell ads. So we sell these gigantic ads, and lots of money was brought in from those ads, from commercials, television commercials. And then when shows were going for a long run, they'd go into syndication, they'd go into reruns, and then there'd be more opportunities to generate revenue. And also DVD sales came in the 90s. So there were all these opportunities that triggered revenue, and our residuals, which basically was a formula that was won by the actors and the writers, that said, for every broadcast of our programs, of our work in first run and in syndication and in rerun and in DVD sales, we were afforded a very small portion of each of those sales and each of those reruns. But because of the formula, this resulted in residual checks that were quite, they were quite substantial in the tens of thousands. And, when writers and actors were in between jobs, it's a freelance economy. So sometimes workers might not work for a year or so, or 6 months. Those residual checks made it very easy to have a sustainable career and continue working and put yourself through those times when you might not be employed. And you were able to afford health insurance. So it was a very sustainable model. And then what happened was, in the early aughts, entered the streaming platforms, which is basically the tech economy coming into Hollywood. So that model was very different. It did not rely on ad sales. It relied only on subscriptions. So there was no ad revenue from first runs. There was no ad revenue from reruns. There was no ad revenue from syndication, and there was no DVD sales, because who needs to buy DVDs when everything is available when you turn on your TV at a touch of a button. So that really decimated this business model that has been working for the last 60 years. And even though we won residuals in the 2007 strike for streaming, no one really anticipated how things were going to play out. And so what you have now, among many different effects that business model has had on the business, one of the big ones, is that residual checks have greatly reduced the amount. So now, where actors and writers were getting, a $10,000 check for their work because the success of a show generated that kind of revenue, people are getting checks for like $3 and $4 for the same kind of activity around a show. So you could have a hit show. You get paid for your time on the show when you're writing on the show, but 6 months later, that residual check that you were expecting to be, $5 or $10,000 is now $5 and $10. And so that's just one of the reasons why the new business model has sort of decimated the ability to have a sustainable career. And so but there are many other ones. So streaming companies have shrunk budgets. And so instead of 22 episodes a year, which kept writers and actors working almost the whole year, you have 8 and 10 short orders of 8 and 10, which keeps people in work for maybe 20 weeks tops. And so short orders and mini rooms and cutting the budgets and combining jobs of support staff has really reduced the amount of possibility of having a sustainable career. Like, it has become a gig economy as opposed to a sustainable economy, a sustainable career that would keep you working all year round, but also afford you health insurance and also have a path towards retirement with pensions. All of that is gone. So now writers are working 10 weeks out of the year, if they're lucky, and actors are doing the same. And the checks that are coming in are not really a sustainable income. I think that another big thing that I think that I need to also express is that the fact that there's a big myth that everyone in Hollywood is a millionaire, right? It's absolutely not true. Certainly there are the Harrison Fords and the Jennifer Lawrences who make millions of dollars. But if you look at the end credits of any television show or any feature film, there are hundreds of names there, literally hundreds. And out of those hundreds of names, there's a Jennifer Lawrence and a Harrison Ford who are making millions. And everyone else on that list, if they're lucky, are making, $100,000 a year if they're very lucky. So that's the thing we have to remember. Like, Hollywood is largely a blue collar industry. The people that work on these shows are craftspeople. There are carpenters and painters and builders and teamsters who drive the trucks and hairstylists and artists. And yes, there are background actors and there are writers involved, but those background actors are not making a lot of money. The SAG membership is 160,000 members, right? Out of those 160,000, the average income for an actor is $26,000 a year, which is barely enough to which is under 26,000 a year, which is barely enough to qualify for their health insurance. So, you know, that's the thing that I think people have to understand, that, you know, the entertainment is a blue collar industry. You know, people's ability to have a sustainable career and pay their rent and put their children to school and have health insurance has been disrupted by the tech industry, by the tech economy. And that's basically what we're fighting for. We're just fighting for fair wages, to be able to have a sustainable career. And again, another little factoid that I want to put across is that the studios have made something like $200 billion last year in profits, 200 billion. And it would cost what the guild is asking for the WGA, what we're asking for basically amounts to 2% of those profits to basically correct the financial system, the financial economy for about 11,000 members. So that amounts to around 450 million. That would cover basically all of our asks. So it's really obnoxious and unfathomable why the studios will not give in to those very reasonable demands that would, if they were met, would correct the financial ecosystem for everybody. Writers and actors would have a healthy financial life, and they'd be more free to create the work that they make billions of dollars off of. So it doesn't make sense to any of us why you know, the studios wouldn't pay 2% to keep everybody financially whole. So that's my basic rant.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. There's a lot of talk about AI as well. I heard a panel where an actor was saying that now they can take, so if you go to an audition, they can take a sort of a picture of you and have your avatar used in like in other things and not pay you. So how is AI affecting you?
Sure. Yeah, AI is another big issue. It's a tech that is emerging that wasn't really around in the last cycle of negotiations back in 2022, I believe, or 2020. But it's emerging now, and the technology is getting better, and the studios are looking towards being able to use the technology to replace creatives. There's been conversation about the ability for AI to replace directors, replace actors, replace writers. And quite frankly, I feel like this is an existential fight that we're on the forefront of that will affect a great many other labor sectors after us. So if we don't put our foot down right now and put some safeguards around AI technology, there's a great many other labor sectors I think that will be affected. You know, I don't think the technology is quite there yet to actually do what I think they think it can do, but it is being used to some degree. I have seen some feature films where, you know, AI has been used to recreate actors who have passed away, who are no longer with us. You know, I think one of the recent Star Wars movies used it. The recent Harrison Ford movie used it. The Indiana Jones, you know, used deep fake technology. But I think that technology is not going away, and I think we'll have to, on some level, agree to use it on some degree. But it really needs to be regulated. I think, you know, an actor giving their permission to be used in a movie with restrictions is absolutely okay, especially if they're getting paid for it, and especially if the estate of a deceased actor is getting paid for it, has given permission. I think that's okay. But you're right. I've read about some productions, for example, Netflix, sneaking in language into backgrounds actors' contracts, whereby those background actors can be were being scanned, their likeness, their physical likeness, and their faces and their voices, and put into you know, into a computer hard drive that could later be used in any capacity. So they basically we're signing out away their rights without really knowing it, unless they have read the specifics of their contract, which is appalling. So imagine you're a brand new actor starting out your career, you do a background gig for Netflix, they scan you, 10 years later, you become a big actor and making millions of dollars, and they have the rights to use you in any capacity they choose because you signed away those rights for $100.
Wow.
That's preposterous.
Yes. Thank you, Jorge. I'm going to move on to, we're going to close pretty soon, but before that, I'm going to invite Professor Emeritus Harley Shaken, who is retired from academics, but he started years ago as a worker for General Motors, then became an organizer, and then stumbled into academics. That's what he told me. What has changed, Professor? What has changed in the last few decades that has changed the game so much for working people, in your opinion?
Oh, I think there have been tremendous changes over the last decades that are very important. Unions have achieved a lot, certainly in manufacturing, but across the economy in so many different sectors. The problem we face today is in the world in which we live, all of this was important and represents real struggles and real victory, but it's not remotely enough to have decent lives for working people or to have a decent society today. And I was really struck by all the presentations and how important they were and the issues they raised, starting with Senator Durazo and the role of a progressive state and what that has meant for working people in California. But what is so troubling is when Lucero speaks about working in a hotel and workers in hospitality industries sleeping in their cars or taking 2 or 3 hour commutes. There's something that doesn't compute here. These are industries where billions of dollars are being made today. And to have people that are essential to these industries functioning at all being treated like this, that is awful for them. But what about their children? What about the communities in which we live? So these are very, very real issues. And what Jorge just spoke about in the context of the writer's strike and the Screen Actors Guild is really critical. And once again, workers here, whether in hotels, striking in LA or in the actors and writers, they are fighting a battle for all Americans. This morning, the consulting firm McKinsey came out with a new report that indicated by 2030, that's around the corner, 30% of all work hours will be impacted by artificial intelligence. So what Jorge is talking about that the Writers Guild is facing today is something that 30% of the work hours, meaning a huge number of workers, will be facing in the future. So the strikes in hotels and in the creative community in films and television and streaming, all of that goes well beyond this in terms of its impact. So that is, I think, a critical dimension of what's taking place today and why all of this is so vitally important. There's another dimension to this. What we are experiencing right now this summer is a summer of solidarity. And we've seen something that many Americans have forgotten, how vital solidarity is for gains that affect everyone. It's not simply the strikes that have taken place, it's the Teamsters who just negotiated the contract with UPS without a strike. The gains they won were very impressive, but would have been impossible without the serious organizing that took place and the very real threat of a strike paralyzing the industry. So the ultimate settlement took a day, but that would have been impossible without workers organized and without effective bargaining and leadership in the union. But this goes beyond the gains that the Teamsters won. or that auto workers might be winning with the September 14th deadline, in very large measure because of something a legendary president of the United Auto Workers, Walter Reuther, once said, when we gain something at the bargaining table, what we win is high velocity purchasing power, meaning we're putting money into the economy. So the Teamster drivers that will be making over $49 an hour at the end of this contract, that stimulates economic growth, but it also sets a standard, whether in auto, hotels, Hollywood, that other workers in other areas of the economy also are going to be able to benefit from.
Thank
So
you.
I would just conclude very briefly by saying, with all of this, unions are vital to a democratic society. They're vital to a healthy economy. And at 6% of the private sector workforce, that calls of the urgency for organizing and expanding labor's role. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Professor Shaken. We are almost out of time. There are some questions in the chat. I will invite Ada Briseño and Jorge Rivera to answer them in the chat if you can, because I think they're directed to you. And I'm going to go around the whole panel for final thoughts, because I want you to tell us, what should we as journalists of color, journalists from ethnic media do to help in this situation? I went through the literal death of newspapers, and many of us have gone through what technology did to media and to the jobs of journalists. So we totally understand what we're talking about. Senator Durazo, can you give us, what should we do? How do we as journalists help?
Well, one thing that Pilar, because you've done it so well, is to tell the stories like the way Jorge told the story of the writers, the way Lucero told the stories, because in the public, that's the best way to remind ourselves what's really at stake. It's real people who work really hard, even if they are different careers and different jobs. That's one thing. The second thing is to look ahead as much as possible. And as I barely mentioned earlier, is that we are investing at the state level, at the federal level, tens of billions of dollars into a new green economy. Well, those jobs, if we don't make sure that our investments are going towards and requiring, as a result of contracts with our tax dollars with companies, right? If we don't require that those companies compete on the basis of a high bar, high level of wages and benefits, we're going to end up with a whole economy that is made up of more minimum wage jobs. I've heard stories in the last couple of days about incarcerated people being used, their labor being used for work of factories like parts that go to the EV, electric vehicles. So imagine that, incarcerated people, the child labor, and we get all excited about, oh my God, EV vehicle, those vehicles and how progressive it is for the environment, but we're not thinking enough about what's behind it. And so not only do we have to deal with the current crisis in these various industries, but more importantly, what's the future in those industries? Otherwise, we find ourselves reacting. We didn't do anything early on about homelessness. Now look how we're dealing with it. Every time, if we don't look ahead and fight, for that future, we end up in a crisis. So I urge us to use our solidarity, in that direction.
Gracias, Senadora. Thank you, Senator. Professor Lichtenstein, final words?
Just one word is this. I think that for your constituency, the ethnic media, is to make it absolutely clear to the readers at all times that the working class in America, whether it's unionized or not, is basically an ethnic working class of African Americans, of Latinos, of Asians. I mean, this is the heart and soul. This is not some marginal or minority. That was a phrase. This is the majority of the working class in America, and that needs to be made absolutely clear, front and center. I've always thought one of the worst things Trump did was to try to reify the idea that workers were some white male guys with from West Virginia. I mean, in fact, it's of course hotel workers and others all over California and the rest of the country. So that I think needs to be shouted out continuously, so people have the sense that we are in fact the heart and soul of America.
Thank you so much. Ada Briceño?
Yes. So the bigger these corporations are, the harder it is to make to move forward. So I just want to urge folks to be supportive of strikers and not cross picket lines. So urgent that if there's a picket line, that you stop and march with us, but most importantly, do not cross it. But we will keep fighting one day longer. We feel very optimistic that our members are holding the line very strongly, that we are winning every day. But it's going to take some time and a lot of us standing together, right, Jorge, to make sure that we make the gains that our families deserve. And when you lift folks in the hotel industry, we lift others. And right now, as you heard, 6% of the private sector is unionized. We are fighting for all hotel workers across the country. When we lift them here in LA, we will open doors for others to be lifted across the United States.
Thank you. Lucero, te invito a unas últimas palabras. ¿Qué te gustaría pedirle a las personas que te escuchen? Pues quita tu mute, por favor, que no te oímos. I'm asking Lucero to say her piece.
Pues que nos apoyen, que ahorita si saben que algún hotel que van a salir de vacaciones, que sea un hotel unión y no está bajo contrato, que por favor no se queden ahí, que vayan para otro lado. Si quieren visitar Los Ángeles, el Westin Bonaventure tiene contrato, hotel libre, van a tener vacaciones felices, pero sí les pedimos el apoyo a todas las personas y que no se molesten con nosotros si les molesta nuestro ruido. Es parte de nuestro trabajo, es una de las cosas que se hace con el strike y no es para molestar a las personas, solamente estamos peleando por un mejor futuro. Así como lo hicieron nuestras generaciones pasadas, ahora lo estamos haciendo para las generaciones futuras.
Gracias, Lucero. She says, please support us. If you go to a hotel, if you're going on vacation, if you're going somewhere, please pick a hotel that has a union and a contract. In LA, the Westin Bonaventure is one of those hotels. Please don't be cross with us if we make noise. This is the way we strike. We are doing the best we can to have a better future, just like other generations did it. Thank you, Lucero. And then final words by Professor Chaikin.
I think this has been a really remarkable discussion, and I think we're in the midst of a successful economy right now. President Biden deserves important credit for that. To make it a decent society, we need strong unions, and we need the yelling on picket lines to get there.
Thank you, everyone. This has been an incredible panel. I appreciate all of you coming together and putting up with me limiting the time because we had a big panel. Thank you to the journalists, and I'm sorry we couldn't get through too many questions because we had such a big panel. But have a good weekend, please, and we'll see you here next Friday with another briefing.